He got a lot of it from Hart Crane, who was his favorite poet. He always traveled with a copy of Hart Crane's poems. He had a white binding with blue fleur-de-lis on it, which he had had made in Florence, and that was Tennessee's talisman. And he's very reliable on the human heart. If anybody wants you to be reliable.
Question here.
Your novel Julian, about the Emperor Julian, can you talk a bit about why you picked to write about him as opposed to other of the Roman emperors?
Well, Julian was the most interesting for me, obviously. That's why I wrote about him. What he stood for was, he stood against absolutism, specifically in religion. He himself was a Neoplatonist, and his great relative, Constantine the Great, had made the Roman Empire totally Christian, and it had to be Christian. That was the law. And Constantine did it not because he believed that Jesus wanted him for a sunbeam. He didn't. Constantine was a very calculating politician. And after he had put together the Roman Empire, which had been cracking up, Constantine had no organizational system. How to collect taxes. The postal service didn't work. Who had one? The church. The church had been in business for 200 or 300 years by then. So he became a Christian. And the alliance was, all right, you will get all the perks that you will have as a national religion, and I will use your tithing methods to tax my people, and your roads and your couriers for my couriers and my messages. Julian thought this was ignoble, and Julian was also something Constantine wasn't. He was a great general. He reconquered Gaul, and then he made the mistake of setting out for Parthia, where a Christian soldier killed him from his own army. But he shook everybody up, and he echoes through the ages. The literature on him. Ibsen wrote a play about him, and so did Lorenzo de' Medici. I mean, he appealed to a wide range of people. And finally, he fell into my hands.
I have a question for Professor Altman, and then perhaps an afterword from Gore. Professor Altman, as you have suggested that Gore should win the Nobel Prize for the American Chronicles series, and as you are a political scientist, can you discuss the place of the American Chronicles novels in American literature?
The question is about the place of Gore's American Chronicles, which is the series beginning chronologically with Berne, ending with Washington, D.C. Look, I'm interested, Dennis, that you quite rightly said I'm a political scientist and not a literary critic. And perhaps because I'm not a literary critic, I am able to fully appreciate the writing of the American Chronicles. One of the great pleasures of writing this book was I actually had to go back and read the 7 novels in the historical order, which is not the order in which I think you wrote them. And in fact, it is a remarkable picture that I don't think has any parallel in American writing of the development of the United States. What is, I think, particularly interesting in the current political situation, and one of the reasons why I regard Gore as so important, is if you read the American Chronicles, what you really get is a very detailed, well-imagined and historically accurate account of how the United States developed into a great imperial power. And you can use the word great as I did ironically. Presumably if there are Republicans in the audience they would use it self-congratulatory. But it is a quite remarkable achievement, and it does capture, I think, some extraordinarily important aspects of the development of the United States. The footnote I'd make on the Nobel Prize is that my sense is increasing the Nobel Prize for literature is given on grounds of political and literary correctness. The last Nobel Prize winner, whose books I can remember reading with enjoyment, was, I think, Nadine Gordimer, which is now, I don't know, I think at least well over a decade ago. I think, I mean, it's a great pity, but the Nobel Prize, I suspect, is becoming increasingly irrelevant as a guide to what is important in contemporary writing.
Rather like Swedish restaurants.
I have a question.
Yes.
In the back. Yes, do you have any kind of encouragement or something that you could pass on for those of us who have seen the decay of the institutions of our society and an Orwellian decay of even words and ideas? It's hard to see any light at all in this, and I'm serious about without lapsing into cynicism. Do you have any encouragement? What do you see?
I see what you see. And, well, there is no one-line solution to our problems. I would say that if there were more and more outlets of information that you could get to the people, and there are some things that we have not tried, which might change politics totally. The lovable old Ayatollah Khomeini, the joy of Iran, pulled off a revolution in his country, both a religious one and a political one. The Shah was getting worse and worse, more tyrannical. Khomeini was living in France, so he was persuaded to do regular sermons on tape, which were recorded, audio tapes. These are handed around all over Iran for nothing, because you can make 1 million tapes and it costs absolutely nothing. Very, very little. Through that, his voice was heard everywhere. He wasn't allowed in the country. His voice was heard everywhere. And it was a commanding voice, and it was a voice allegedly speaking for God and for the Iranian people. And in no time at all, he came back to Iran and took the country over, and the Shah fled. We now have these discs, which can be made more and more cheaply. And I proposed this before, that there's no reason why you couldn't get somebody popular with the public, Paul Newman, to discuss Social Security. Well, he's collecting it. And no, these are to inform the people through actors or other types that they trust. Now, it's not all that difficult to understand what's behind privatization. I mean, this is the last great gold rush since 1849. This is how everybody's going to get rich around Wall Street. So they want to privatize. Well, you can simply explain it. And when you do that, people, are very alert to their own interests. And the genius of this administration is getting people to vote against their own interests joyously. That's probably because he wraps himself in the flag. At least he remembers it's the American flag. Who knows, it may be Argentinian next time we see him bouncing along